Goedenavond iedereen en welkom op onze 5e masterclass al van Rock Paper Pencil. Dit keer zijn we heel gelukkig dat Vincent Vergonjeanne, I hope I pronounced that well, has come all the way from Poland, dat hij helemaal van Polen is overgevlogen om ons hier te woord te staan, om ons iets meer te vertellen over bordspellen en innovatie. Toen we aan dat thema dachten, dacht ik eigenlijk direct aan hem, omdat ik wist dat hij uit de videogame sector komt en nu in de bordspellenwereld zit. En hij gebruikt die ervaring ook echt voor een mooie kruisbestuiving tussen de twee. Dus hij gaat ons de ideale mens zijn om ons daarover meer te vertellen. Ik geef graag het woord aan Vincent.
Hi, well, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to talk to you tonight about, well, the word innovation is very broad, and actually we're going to talk a lot about hybrid board game, more specifically tonight, and how weirdly the board game is getting a renaissance in the last 7-8 years, mostly because of this, which is it's a tool of communication, but it's also a tool of isolation in a way, and a social isolation, and that there is this renewal of like, we want to spend time together again. We're kind of deprived of that, and how though this renaissance was born because of the fear of this or getting away, that actually this is rejoining again, a new cycle. So I'm going to tell you a bit about me. I come from the video game industry. In 2009, I co-founded a company called Kobojo with two others. We were basically doing Facebook games. I don't know if you have played the games on Facebook in 2010 and helped grow some cows on your virtual farm. I was doing a bit of that. We raised a bit of money, grew a fairly large company. Objectively too big for me at the time. I was 30 years old and there was a lot to learn out of this. And I moved in 2013 to Poland, where I created another company called Everyday I Play, which was focused in so-called mid-core board games. Mid-core free-to-play video games. And during that time, we're trying to sell stuff because I was doing so-called free-to-play games. So free-to-play is, I'm sure you've all experienced it. It's all free. It's all accessible on your phone. You can download it. And actually only 1 to 2% of player will actually, spend money in the game. Recently, actually, there's a huge growth of this advertisement-based free-to-play. At the time, it was not that big, and so we're like, why don't we try to sell physical things to our players? And it turns out, the only thing we could do was stockless stuff. I mean, we're digital people, like having a stock and manufacturing, scary. So mugs, shirts, 3D printing, and the outcome was it failed miserably. It's just not working. We tried for a long time, up until my brother contacted me one day. Vikings Gone Wild, if you've seen earlier, this is the game on the left on the screen here, was actually a Facebook game that was kind of something very close to what Clash of Clans or other of those games are, basically. And he contacts me and says, "Hey, Vincent, I'm making some board games. Remember, we used to play those together a long time ago. I'm trying to design some of those, and I'm wondering if I could use some of the visual of your video game." And I was like, "Well, sure you can, but then why don't you make an adaptation of my video game into a board game rather than using it in a very generic way?" And he said, "Yeah, why not?" So 6 months later, I meet him at my parents' house, June 2015. And I tried this deck building game, so-called, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I have not played at the time. I have not played a board game in years. We used to play board game with my brother, as like everybody in the 90s. I'm like, let's do this. At the time, I don't have a board game company. Sorry, we decided to do this internally as inside a video game company. And for the first time in 10 years, when we share the first images of that box, for the first time in 10 years, people are like, "Wow, what is that? I want it." it was a huge gap between a T-shirt, no thank you, to a board game. Yeah, I want that. We proceeded and actually, created this board game. We went on Kickstarter in June 2016, so pretty much a year after that famous time I met with my brother at my parents' house, and it was quite successful. We did 2 Kickstarter over a year and a half. Made $500,000 at the time, I was very happy with this number, and the game has sold in retail for a first game pretty decently, 35,000 units. We're very happy with that at the time. So we decide I decide, my brother remained in his full-time job in France, but I'm an entrepreneur. This is my 3rd or 4th company. I decide to officially create Lucky Duck Games and try to turn this model into a full-time job. And specifically, the idea was to take those video game IPs and turn them into board games. And the 2 first IPs that we took was Zombie Tsunami and Fruit Ninja. Zombie Tsunami was, or is still, a game that has over 400 million downloads, and Fruit Ninja is a game that has 1.5 billion downloads. Those were, I thought at the time, some of the largest thing I could ever dream. I was very happy. We worked really hard to get those IPs and sign those deals, and it kind of didn't work so well. Actually, as a matter of fact, it failed miserably. Zombie Tsunami did $70,000 on Kickstarter and sold less than 5,000 in retail. And Fruit Ninja actually even failed on Kickstarter. Actually, as a matter, we canceled it, and we didn't sell much. So it's very disappointing, because you're like, wait, I did so well with my little video game at the time, and now that I took on those very large, big video game IP, it's not working so well. So what's going on here? And so it turns out there is multiple things they had in common, and the first one in video game industry is called retention, and retention is the amount of days, of consecutive days someone engaged with a game. And it sounds so obvious as I say that now, that obviously someone needs to engage into something for them to be emotionally connected to it and maybe buy a board game out of it one day. And Vikings Gone Wild actually was a game that was around for 4 years at the time we did the board game, and some of the core players had played the game for 4 years literally. Turns out I can't give you the KPIs of both of those games. I'm under NDA, but I tell you, they are not great. Also, it turns out most of the traffic was not coming from countries that buys board games. And the last one, that there is no obvious transposition. When you look at those are very small casual games that were like, oh yeah, that's going to be a great board game. So that was kind of the infancy of Lucky Duck Games, and not a very strong start, I have to admit. And so something emerged of that. In February 2017, I'm in Cannes Festival, and I meet David Sicurel, who is the author of a game called Chronicles of Crime, which we published later. And at the time, he has this 55 card game that is chasing me for 2 days. Vincent, I have a hybrid game. I want to show it to you. And the word hybrid at the time kind of terrifies me for a reason that you'll understand a bit later. But he finally corners me somewhere and shows me his game that basically uses an app and cards. And in 10 minutes, I absolutely fall in love with the concept. There is a lot of work. I mean, it's kind of like visiting an ugly house with kind of 60s unfresh painting on the wall. You're like, okay, if I tear this down and put it white and revamp it, we can make it a beautiful house. It's kind of the state but I'm really seeing something very promising. And Chronicles of Crime actually makes over $1 million on the Kickstarter in February 2018, and has sold over 250,000 games in 16 different languages since. And it has received many, many awards since. So that was a great switch from video game IP. And I'm just going to show you a quick video of what is Chronicles of Crime. Chronicles of Crime is the cooperative game of criminal investigation, combining a board game, an app, and virtual reality in the most clever way I've ever witnessed. Players start the app, choose the scenario they want to play, and follow the story. The goal is to catch the murderer in the shortest time possible. Using scan and play technology, each component has a unique QR code which, depending on the scenario selected, will activate and trigger different clues and stories. That means players will be able to get new stories after the game is released simply by downloading them. Finally, the game lets you fully experience the story by allowing players to search for clues in virtual reality. So buckle up and let us transport you straight to the crime scene. All right. As you can see, I was much more svelte and young and fresh, and my French accent was unmissable. So that was Chronicles of Crime. Interestingly, at that point, we realized that a much better thing than the fact that we know people who have big video games as a legacy from where we come from in the video game industry, was rather the fact that we know how to make video game ourselves, and that well combined, this could be something fairly revolutionary in a way. So now I'm going to give you a bit of a journey on how I got into hybrid games, because it didn't start just on Chronicles of Crime. I actually have been lucky with two of those previous video game companies, and let's say that I had savings that I've been investing in different companies in the past. And one of them in 2014 is a young board game company that wants to focus on hybrid games. At the time, I have no idea what's the board game industry. I'm into the video game, but I like what those guys want to do, and they published this first game called RAR. And RAR was basically a board game that was using augmented reality. Augmented reality is when you have you use your actual camera and you put on top of the camera something that's virtual. So you have reality and you have an augmented reality on top of it, versus virtual reality where you are literally in a completely virtual world. When you see it in the video, there's this girl has this mask in front of her, and there's no, it doesn't shoot what's around her. It's completely virtual. She sees a crime scene that's completely virtual. That's the difference between augmented reality and virtual reality. Here it's called augmented reality. It worked pretty well. I learned quite a bit with that because the game was actually selling very well in mass market in Poland. And unfortunately for those guys, they did not own the right to it. They actually sold it fully to a company called Treffel, which maybe some of you are familiar with. The bad news is everything else they've done after that failed, like every single one of them. They also did a Kickstarter 2015 that failed, and ultimately their company went bankrupt, and so was my money. But worry not, that was a wonderful, wonderful thing for me to witness. And now, retrospectively, when David Securite is like, I have a hybrid game, I'm like, I've been there, thank you. I was pretty terrified indeed because of that. The good news is David's game had a lot of things in common with RAR and a lot of things not in common with those that failed. So here are some of the lessons learned that I had though from this company. Do not contain yourself to a single market. I'm sharing some of this notes that are just bigger than just innovation. I witnessed this guy being focused only on the Polish market and failed to find enough revenue outside of that local market. And also they licensed their work rather than being their own publisher, losing a substantial amount of revenue, which is really what caused them demise. But ultimately, it showed me that hybrid is scary for many board gamers because Because again, a lot of board gamers are playing board games to stay away from this, and the single idea of having that on the table around a board game is absolutely terrifying for a lot of them, or like usually terror, which comes out to denegation and hatred and like, what are you doing? Born by fear. So the question is, why did I sign Chronicles of Crime, and what made me flip that switch coming from a background of doing things? Well, I've compiled basically what we spent a year developing with David Sicurel from his game to make it the success that it was into 5 key lessons. The first one is that if you ever use a board game if you use an app into a board game, that app should be irreplaceable. You often hear, oh, you have an app, but can I play without it? And the first answer that a publisher might want to say, yes, it's fine, you can play without it. We made a 350-page book on the side that you can use if you don't hate if you hate our technology. And I think that if this is the answer, it's not a good answer, because it means that this app shouldn't be there if you have a way to place this. And this irreplaceability, I will give you an example. For example, in Chronicles of Crime, the app is nothing more than a digital rule book, a digital book in a way. But the writers have tools with this app that they could not have with paper, because people in their story have different status. They can move, they can die. Object can be like location can open, can close. There is a notion of time, which bring a dynamism that paper can't buy in an easy way, or adding many sub-indexes. And also it brings a fluidity of getting to the next text, where you don't have to kind of go to page 55 and look for it. It brings a fluidity where things are just snappy and go fast. When you look at RAR actually also had this in common, in a way that it was showing to the player. Short summary, RAR is basically Scotland Yard, where there is one person who is trying to hide and everybody else trying to figure out where he is in a way. And so the way the app was integrated provided this information to the player was trying to hide in a way that was very clever, and in a way irreplaceable. You could not play without the app. Well, that's the first lesson. The second one is have as little technical barrier as possible. Because we have been so successful with a digital board game or hybrid board game, we have had a lot of other young authors coming with ideas, and this one is often the biggest point of like, that's not going to work. Typically, no network needed is the first question we have had. Yeah, can I download this and play remotely in my cabin because this is where I play, or like, does it work on iOS, on Android, but also on Windows? The last one is work regardless of the environment, and I have a story on this. So as you saw, we use QR codes, and QR codes are actually, it's a very old technology. It's not a great technology actually. You have to be first of all, the lighting has to be perfect, and then you actually, if there is an angle, it doesn't read well. You actually have to be perfectly parallel to this. And if in theory that was good enough, in practice it was horrible. Because if the lighting was bad, or if that person was just not paying attention, because it looks okay on my screen, but it was slightly misoriented, then it was not scanning. And then the technology kind of comes back to your face. It's not working. I can't play. It's frustrating. What is this? What's happening? Thierry, what can you come please? It's not working. What do you mean it's not working, Mom? Blah, blah, blah. So we worked a lot, and I mean a lot. We spent almost 7-8 months in working some kind of overall layer on top of QR code so that you could scan it in any light condition, in any angle, on any device, to really remove that technical barrier that no matter where you are, even though you use a phone, and no matter what the quality of your phone, this phone would just not be there. It's just a way to access text, but you forget that there's magic happening at the bottom so that things are fluid and don't take you away from the experience. in many ways, it's something you can experience when you play a board game and suddenly there's a rule question and that rule guy comes in there. It's like, I swear I can find it. And, wait, give me 2 more minutes and I'm looking for it. And this is a big slump where the emotion of the stuff was high and suddenly it's falling down. Everybody's pulling their phone. Well, let us know once you got the rule. And it's the same thing except that it's technology. The third one is only one device. And I will, you'd think that everybody has a device nowadays. Nope. I have actually a great example from David Sicurel, the same author of Chronicles of Crime. David was a couple of years ago really focused on trying to make hybrid games, and I had a lot to share on his success and failure. He had one game called, I think it was called Selfie Safari, where all players, everybody was given the picture of an animal, and everybody had to have a phone and simply make a selfie. You don't need an app, just make a selfie. And one player had to figure out who has which picture. That's it. That's as simple as that. The publisher, French publisher, actually did a really good promotion on this. It was Cannes last year when it was released. With the booth, I thought was very good marketing, and the output was that the game was their worst seller ever, literally ever. And I think, and David admitted to me that actually the fact that you need to have a device to play that game was one of the major break to it, because in many places when he would organize this, there was always been this one person who doesn't have it. It's like, oh no, but she cannot play, so let's play something else. Or simply, it was again another break to inclusion. And having this one device, I think, is extremely key for to make sure that the nobody is left on the side. The fourth one is. It should obviously help make things accessible. And I have some great story on when this is done well. This is really helpful. Obviously, the typical usage of the app is when it acts as a game master, because it really it does a lot of the things that the player doesn't have to remember. And this sounds obvious, but actually there's also a lot of hybrid games that simply don't do that. But the best story I have to share with you was from our German publisher. They are called Corax Game. And he told me the story of the Stuttgart, I hope I said that right, Stuttgart event, where basically the event called him a week before this big convention in Germany. And he said, well, I have this big space right next to your booth, and the publisher is not coming. If you can have something there with some demo people, tables, I will give it for you for free. Make the best out of it. He said, you know what, I'll take it, I'll deal with it. It was too short time for him to find any helpers, unfortunately, to deal with this thing. But what he did is that he put, I think it was 6 or 7 tables with just Chronicles of Crime and a little sheet that says, download the app on the App Store, turn it on, click here and here, and just follow the tutorial. And basically, the space was full for the 3 days of the convention, and he told me that basically he made more sales of the game at this convention than he did at Essen, which is, the largest event in terms of sales. And what's very interesting with this story is that it really shows that the one of the when it's well done, and one of the luck that I have with Chronicles of Crime, the game, you really don't need a rule book. You turn on the app and you start a tutorial mission that will literally teach you the game as you go through. And this accessibility in this case turn into a booth that manages itself, where people basically sit down, learn the game by themselves, on-job themselves enough that actually they will just walk 10 meters more and then buy the game. And so that's certainly an inclusion of technology that really, for me, can improve, in a way, accessibility, because rules are always the hardest thing, right? So, the fifth one is it should surprise you and drive the game. And can the app surprise player? So I'll give you examples of surprises what we have in Chronicles of Crime. Because it's story driven, the app can adapt to what it knows of the player right now. For example, there's two ways you can be surprised by the app. The first one is that you receive a phone call. So literally you receive a phone call. The app comes to you. It says, even though you are thinking, hey, what should we do? It's like, oh my God, it's ringing. What should we do? Well, just take it. And the app will tell you, hey, you've done a sloppy job on that crime scene, and we found this evidence and this evidence. Why don't you go to location M and talk to James Carter 42? What the app just did there is that actually it gives you a catch-up. It was very thematic. We just know that after N turns, you did not find a specific clue that we wanted you to find in that crime scene in order to not be blocked. And the app proactively actually came back to you and say, hey, in a very thematic way, oh, sloppy job. Well, actually, it's a game design. Actually, it's a feature of the game that actually we're like, hey, here is you may not even know you're blocked, but you will be blocked. And by the way, so this is what you need to get there. It's not only does it help with the fluidity and a little bit of a magic trick, I would say, in a way, game design has a lot to do with being a magician, where, even though you drive the experience, at the end the person feels amazed and feels like he or she understood everything that happened. Actually, they don't. And a good game design is a game design that gives a sense of mastery to player, where they feel like they solved it, they did it, they made all the choices, where actually, in truth, some of those choices may have been driven by the game designer choices himself and the lack of choices therefore. And this kind of advanced way of helping a group to catch up on something they've missed is the perfect way for an app to have a bit of magic, because none of the players know that was a trick for you to have the optimal experience, for you to play the game in an hour, and for you to feel pretty smart about yourself and solving crime in a relatively timely fashion. The other layer of surprise, which is again a link to being story-driven, is the fact that you can have theatrical phone calls that are not linked to a catch-up, but rather haha. So you receive a phone call and you learn that the witness you were just talking with just died. Like, what? Oh my gosh, I hope we ask every question we had to ask this person. Wow, and what does it mean now? There's two dead on our case, and so there's a sense of thrills that also comes from the dynamic aspect of the app and the way it's consumed through the text. That really make this augmented version of a board game so much more thrilling. And so what's next to all these things? Well, certainly one company has been paving the way heavily toward that. It's their Fantasy Flight game. They're based in the US. They're owned by Asmodee. And I think they have shown some of the base case of use of hybrid games. Both of the game I'm showing you right now have some narrative-driven things. Mansion of Madness does a very good usage of this kind of surprise type of things, kind of using almost of a horror background. Yeah. Oh, it's not showing anything for the last 50 minutes. Are you serious? My name is Vincent, and oh, so you've seen none of my. My name is Vincent. It's a pleasure to meet you. Well, let me show you quickly all my slides then, because I've been clicking and. Okay, so let's have a bit of a catch up. Ta-da! So it's much better with something to look at, isn't it? So irreplaceable. As little barrier as possible. I guess you were much more focused on me because you had nothing to look at. It's like, wow, this guy came so unprepared. No network, only one device. It should make the game more accessible. It should surprise the player and drive the game. And now, Mansion of Madness and the Lord of Rings, thank you so much for, by the way, help me catch up on like a magic trick. All right, I'll continue. So yeah, augmented narrative-driven board games certainly are, in my view, the best use case for these apps. And as I was mentioning, Mansion of Madness does a very good job with this, with basically this kind of a horror background where you can really use the multimedia to kind of have this ha type of moment where the audio really comes in to add a layer of thematic, and yet not necessarily untangle you out of the board game itself, because you still have to roll dice, you still have to manipulate miniatures, you still have to kind of discuss together what's the best outcome of it. And in the case of Mansion of Madness, the app is irreplaceable. As a matter of fact, the first edition of it exists without the app, but was not even as close as successful as the second one, because it required
big book.
Yeah, exactly, and a very intimidating book. I guess it was more of an RPG game at this point rather than a board game in a way. The Lord of the Ring, I think, uses a little bit of the same kind of mechanics. We ourselves actually developed one of those. It's called Time of Legend Destinies. It was on Kickstarter in October. It was very successful in our rewards, and it's again use this time less QR code. Still uses a QR code, but it's a lot more kind of point of interest driven. So you basically have I don't know if you see my. No, you don't see my thing. But yeah, so you have a board on the top left where you kind of evolve. You see this kind of come alive in front of you. You can kind of reflect, and also each location may actually have some clues. But ultimately, you discover how these things unfold using the app, and basically using the app as a digital book. It provides all these tools for writers that book would not provide, and it kind of fluidified the experience, make it accessible. Actually, as a matter of fact, we struggled with this game because the reviewers we contacted earlier were like, "Oh no, we don't do expert games." And it's true, it looks like a big box with miniatures. It looks a little intimidating. The truth is that you don't need to read much of the rule book. The app will tell you how to play, and actually most of them were like, actually it was much lighter than I thought, and it was very enjoyable. So we have some new barrier to kind of break now, because this kind of big $60, $80 box often kind of rings like an expert game, where actually doesn't have to be anymore because of the introduction of the app. So we have basically, as I mentioned earlier as an introduction, this kind of board game renaissance that was kind of born. I mean, this is my own reading, but I think it really has had a spectacular organic growth, and the timing is just too crisp around accessibility of games through apps, but also a form of isolation through apps and this democratization. And therefore, it is a tricky business to bring apps into board games. And actually, I have more example of failed hybrid games than successful one. And when I tried to compile coming here today, what was really in common with all the ones that have succeeded. And it's literally holding to this one sheet, which now you can read. The app should be irreplaceable. Absolutely. The answer should be, sorry, you cannot play my game without this app. Do not try to satisfy the app-scared population, because in a way it means that this app should not be there if it's true, and it's really important. And I really want to break down this reality. Either Unlock from it's I don't remember their name. It's Unlock is from Space Cowboy, or Chronicles of Crime. I mean, the volume of games sold in if it's not mass market, at least is way beyond the hobby market, speaks volume. App is not scary when it's well integrated, when it has the right ring to it, when it's replaceable. So don't see it as something that has to be for the hobby market only. It's not true, and therefore don't listen to these hobby voices, because typically there are hobby voices that are terrified of this. To find a replacement for that app, have as little technical barrier to it. It's incredibly important. I'll give you one last example on this. We tried a pretty clever design that was basically that was kind of another kind of social deduction game but everybody needed to have a phone, and all those phones needed to be connected to the same Wi-Fi room. Oh my goodness. Once you had that setting, the game was absolutely amazing, because it had extra layers of communications and implication that the central server had. The server knew who everybody was and could basically do dynamic things in the way that I mentioned Chronicles of Crime into one of this game. But the problem is that to get everybody under the same Wi-Fi and have everybody have the same phone, just kill the game before you even tried it, because you spend half an hour trying to set it up. It doesn't work for me. Oh, it doesn't work for you. It's for me to actually prepare this show today. We spent half an hour trying to get my screen on this stuff, and it felt like it. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna speak for an hour about innovation, and yet here I am struggling for half an hour trying to set up my laptop to be on that screen. And it's a little bit of the same thing. So having a single device, having as little network requirement as possible, is a big thing. Using the app to make things more accessible, and not necessarily as a shortcut to help. For example, other example of failed app integration are simple time counter, or simple things to count points. I mean, it's nice, but it's really just not needed. It doesn't necessarily make the game more accessible. It's not going to teach you the game. And ultimately, if the app can drive surprises, can bring some theatrical, some kind of Hollywood in your life, or some Hollywood in a way of sound, of music, of thematic and ambiance, but also in the way of ta-da, by the way, the building just was exploded. What? Sorry, my name is Vincent. I make board games. And I think this is it. And so if you are thinking about making an app, make sure this checks all those boxes. And thank you for listening to my chat today without stuff. Thank you, guys. So I don't know if you have questions.
Yeah, I was going to ask the same thing. Let me start, maybe. Sure. I have one question. I know one example of a game I think does work well with the app, but can also be played without the app.
Go for it.
And that's Alchemists.
Alchemist, fair enough.
But the thing is that when you play it without the app, one player cannot play with the rest, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, there will always be a few counterexamples, that's the rule. But beside this guy, do you have anybody else that you have in mind that's...
No, but I have a better question for you.
Okay, go for it.
One more.
Yeah, go for it. Absolutely.
Game development is time consuming, right?
Yep.
Because you have to test the games hundreds of times and so on.
Mm-hmm.
When you compare the time that you spent on app development,
Mm-hmm.
and you compare that with the time that you normally spent on developing the board game,
Mm-hmm.
how would that...
It's a fair question. So obviously, Lucky Duck, my old chief technical officer from from Everyday Play joined me on Lucky Duck. So I come armed with people who know how to make video game. It certainly is a bit more scary to make an app-driven game if you don't have knowledge with apps. I see it as going to the garage with your car. It's not quite working, and you really hope the guy is not gonna, tell you to change half of the car because you don't understand anything about it, and you're like, oh yeah, sir, you have 13,000 euro of changes. I'm sorry. And I feel like if you don't know app development, it has a bit of a daunting thing when you have to go through a third party to develop this. It's certainly, I think, if you can do it, it's better to do this internally, either through an intern or by betting on yourself and hiring a full-time developer to join the team and to do this internally. Chronicles of Crime, the app itself took about 3 months of development, but the tool for the developers took about 6 months. So it was about 9 months of development, and most of the time spent on that tool for the writers, because it had to be simple to use. It has to be powerful enough. Everybody constantly had new requests, new feature. They wanted, I want to be able to do this, and I'm lucky to have some very good programmers, so we didn't have too many bugs. The things were fairly. We were at home. We've been doing this for so many years that it was a nice crossover from my past. But it can be somewhat time consuming. I would say the hardest thing was actually playtesting. It's dependent also from the type of gameplay we have, which is story driven. So you really can't replay it by the same group. So it means you have to find new group all the time, because it's kind of a one-time consumption kind of thing. So it's much harder to play test. It's not harder to play test. It's just harder to find so many groups you can freshly exposed to what you've done. And I don't know if I answer your question, but.
Yes. Thank you. Does anybody else has any question?
In the beginning of the PowerPoint, you pointed out with Facebook games like Zombie Tsunami and Fruit Ninja that they were not a big success, but I actually recently seen there's Jetpack Joyride, so
yes.
why
So
is that actually the leap then?
Yes. Actually, we had 2 very successful games after that. I didn't mention them in this PowerPoint because I wanted to focus on innovation and rather start I mentioned those because it was the beginning of the company and what led to Chronicles of Crime. But we had 2 successful games after that. And both of them had one thing actually, they had a couple of things in common, which I can go back to what I mentioned here, which was important for so why those were not successful. The first one is that both of them were a much more obvious transposition. So Jetpack Joyride adaptation, literally, you can literally see the level of the video game, and we have those yellow plastic pieces that you put on top of them. Super clever design by a Polish designer, Michał Gomowski. And you see this one image, this one marketing image, and you understand in a snap how this works if you know the video game. Also, Jetpack Joyride, which was actually, thanks goodness for me, it was in the same deal as Fruit Ninja, which if it was not, then I would have lost a lot of money. But basically, it had literally 6 times more better retention than Fruit Ninja Jetpack Joyride. Turns out, in average, people were playing it 2 months. Versus you do the math for the other one, which was pretty bad. And so it turns out people who have played Jetpack Joyride are a lot more emotionally charged toward recognizing it, remembering how they felt playing it, and being like, "Oh my God, Jetpack Joyride! What is that?" And where Fruit Ninja, the reaction was more like, "Is it the thing with the fruit? Is it the fruit thing?" It's like, yeah. And you can really see the difference in answers. But our biggest success was Kingdom Rush. Interestingly, Jetpack Joyride was 800 million downloads, so it's still quite an IP. Kingdom Rush was on only 40 million downloads, so like a much smaller things. And we have grossed over $1.5 million on this adaptation. It's like, what's the difference here? And I think the major thing is that Kingdom Rush is actually a series of 4 video games. And it, in a way, it spreads that retention over many, many years. And when you look at the most successful franchise in movies, they always at least 3, 4, 5 of them. And in a way, Kingdom Rush really had that perfect thing. And so at the end of the day, picking a video game is really not about the amount of people who've played it. Absolutely not. You could do extremely well with a very small video game, but the one thing is how old is the app, how well is engaged, and how well is engaged the community that plays it. I think this is the real key factors. And the last thing, how does it obviously transpose into a board game? Like, how is it? Like, oh yeah, I can see that. And like, oh yeah, oh wow, yeah. Kingdom Rush was an absolute abuse. Like we made a miniature version of all those boss, all those things. People were like, oh my gosh, it was this fantasy digital world finally taking light in front of their eyes, and so it worked out very well for us. And so that's definitely the lesson learned there.
What game would you recommend to people to get into the hybrid game genre?
Yeah.
If I told you that I'm not big on murder mysteries, so Chronicles of Crime
It's
would
not for
probably
you.
not
Yeah,
for
yeah.
me.
Well, then Unlock is certainly a good first one to do. Have you heard of Unlock? No. Okay, so look for Unlock. It's very good. It's basically, I would say it's a hybrid version of an escape room. It's very clever. It uses the app. Again, I think it checks every. Okay, Unlock is an extreme success, even bigger than mine. But it really checks every tick box that you have here, which is the app is absolutely replaceable. Basically, instead of having a mini book that tells you like if you enter the right code, what's really tough with reproducing an escape room is that actually there is a company that have done that in France. It's called Escape Box, but one player has to be the game master, right? So one player is like, is it the 5632? No, it's not, because if this guy is not here, this is spoiled, right? You can, it was not actually, but now I see the result. So hey, by the way, this is the result. So, and so they use this. So the app is absolutely replaceable. There's no technical barrier. One device is enough. There's no network required. The game is very accessible. It has a very, very good tutorial, which uses 12 cards or 14 cards that teaches you the concept, and you really get it. You feel smart, which is the key, right? You want people to feel smart about it. And ultimately, every scenario really surprises you with a mini game or a new way to think that's like driven by the app, and that's going to be different. Check. And Unlock is a very good entry to hybrid game to understand what works well or not.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Anyone else? Do you think with virtual reality that's a thing that's going to be more into games? Because you said the phone disconnected us all, but with like you play on a console, now virtual reality is more a thing that you can do together, and now virtual reality is also coming to board games. Is that something that's going to be more, not overrule the physical effect of a board game, but more like the digital world of board gaming then?
No, it's a fair question, actually. As a matter of fact, I think this virtual reality feature in Chronicles of Crime was part of its success. Virtual reality right now has been only accessible to really a niche market of people who have the money to spend big bucks on either a very good PC that can support this, or the hardcore market of PS4 with like the big element stuff. I think with those phones becoming stronger and stronger, we're getting into an era where phone now can be a very good device for a short period of virtuality. I think Chronicles of Crime virtual reality works because it's only a 45-second session. And actually, I can tell you some stories about that. At the beginning, it was actually unlimited time when we first play tested this stuff. And it started to fail because there was like, hey, John, come on, I think we have enough. No, I think I see something as like, and basically you could have players who just literally would not leave the phone. So it was like, all right, let's put a timer in it. And so it ended up being a 45-second timer, forcing, actually it turned out it was great because it added a bit of pressure. Oh, I think I see something, I see that. So it added a bit of excitement in the room as well because of the time pressure that the player had. But really it was built because of John, who just wouldn't let go of the phone after 2 minutes and breaking out the room's kind of like dynamic, like, dude, let's move on. I don't know. So I think there is another aspect to that answer, which is Carmack, which is the guy who invented many of the, Doom. Like basically, is kind of a legend when it comes to video game. When he joined Facebook and the Oculus team, it immediately moved towards the phone version of that. He basically believed that the most accessible form of virtual reality will be through the phone, and so from the beginning he's been working on the I don't remember the name of that subversion of the Oculus that's specific to this. But I think we're just getting into this era, and I'm very proud. Actually, Chronicles of Crime is putting a little bit of touch towards that, and it's great because you could really see people being excited to finally try this thing they've heard about. Like this virtual reality. I want to see. I want to experience it, and it's true. The first time you experience this is mind blowing. It tricks the brain in a way that really makes you think you're in a different place. This is. So it brings an accessibility, I think, that adds a lot of thematic and a lot of excitement if it's well added without breaking the board game promise of playing together, I think. So, but you need to put a timer. That's the lesson.
Nog vragen? Ja.
Hi. My question is about acquiring a specific IP. How would you go about that?
Mm-hmm.
And what would be like the agreement between you and...
Sure, I can tell you more about this. It's definitely more difficult than it looks at first, and I think the key things is you're 95% going to have no answer if you try to contact directly a place. The way I did most of mine is either I knew those people or I, through LinkedIn, discover who was my friend who know the guy. And on the video, in my previous life as a video game entrepreneur, I never had to get an IP. We always made our own IP. So 3 years ago, when I started to acquire IP, I wasted a lot of time trying to contact directly some of those people. And at the end of the day, I stopped doing this. And what I did was always find that middle person that knew that person and said, hey. So first I recognized with, hey, John, how you doing? It's been a while. What's up? And I see you're connected to this person. Could you make me an introduction? Sure, Vincent, I'll make an introduction. And this introduction would just make day and night, basically. Like the people would be introduced from someone from a party they are known, and create conversation. Then once you're discussing, a licensing deal typically has multiple dimensions. It will have a minimum guarantee, which will be a set amount of cash that you have to give first. I managed to get most of my license without it. You can wiggle room in there. It depends if you want to have like Monopoly, you'll get a $4 million minimum guarantee. But Zombie Tsunami, I got out with no minimum guarantee, and for Fruit Ninja, I think it was $50,000. So you see the granularity based on who you're talking with, and then you typically have a percentage based on the sales of each game. The most complex one have a percentage base if it's a direct sale or if it's a sale to wholesalers. Typically, they will ask for more if it's direct sales because there's more margin there, and they believe their brand is what drives that direct sale versus wholesale. And I think the percentage will go between 5 to 14% in term of share revenue. 14% is can be quite a lot. Just to break down some of the math of selling games to wholesaler, I sell my game at 40% of MSRP. So if a game is sold at $100 to someone in shop, I sell it at $40 to a wholesaler. But it cost me $20 to make. So 14% is actually 28% of my wholesale price. It's quite a lot, so it's almost half of my profit. So this percentage you need to be careful to understand. I mean, so after this, if it costs 20% of the MSRP, so it's all about the math of how much it's going to cost you to make that game with that IP inside. And typically, if you get an IP, you need to have a much better ratio than a time 5 that what I'm describing here, which is a cost of something is 5 times is retail price. If you have a times 7 or 8, you're in a much more comfortable position to give this type of percentage. The concluding line to this is that I hope I've also proved you that IP is not always a shortcut, and you really need to do all your homework to make sure that IP is really going to do the job. All those IP holder will always come on the side of like, we have 1.5 billion users with Fruit Ninja, Vincent. Do you realize what is that? So like, oh, yeah, that sounds amazing. It turns out it's a terrible, terrible mashup with board game. So it's like, I've lost so much money on this. But yet on the other hand of the day, Kingdom Rush was the absolutely perfect match. And as a matter of fact, Kingdom Rush was one of those who actually had no minimum guarantee, and those guys never did an IP before. So I was the first guy contacting them to make an IP. I kind of drove the deal, and made it a very fair one for every party. So hope I answer your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I have another one.
Sure,
if
go
that's
for it.
okay.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So if you would make a board game of a video game, how related should they be? Like the story, should it be the same, or should it be different? Should it bring something new to the table for people who?
It's a great question. Great question. I spent 3 years on that question, so I'm more than happy to develop on this. So. The first thing you'll get for sure is that you still need to appeal to both the video game players and the non-video game player without comprising none of them. The video game players, the reason why they buy it is because they have this projection of a premise of a renewed emotion. So when you play a video game, you have a certain state of emotion, right? And actually those free-to-play games kind of bulk on this, that hey, it was good, right? Well, no credit anymore. Do you want to spend $5 right now and get a bunch of more emotional time that you enjoy yourself right now? So it's all about this. It's like, oh, I love Vikings and Wild. Board game. Oh, I can't wait to play this with my son around the table. So there's this promise of going back to this emotion again. So you have in a way still to have fulfill the promise. Yet you still have to make a good board game. And the way we've solved this is by saying that there's no way we can fight this internally and that we should remain a publisher. What we've done after a couple unsuccessful try by doing it ourselves, because we thought we were genius, we are not, is actually we have built a network of 60 different game designers that we've met through different stuff. Said, hey, we have acquired a new IP, and if you want to submit a design, you have 3 months to basically submit something. It doesn't have to be finished. By the way, you are not the only one, so it's kind of a closed competition, but it's a competition again. So we just need from you, enough to play 10-15 minutes of something, just get an idea of your stuff. And that's the best idea we could have, because for Kingdom Rush, we received 15 different prototypes. And we've seen everything with Kingdom Rush real-time, Kingdom Rush turn-based, Kingdom Rush dice, Kingdom Rush abstract, Kingdom Rush cards. I mean, we saw it all, and ultimately the one that was the best really had everything we wanted and was so clever, so different. We could not have come up with the idea they had, and it was the best shortcut we could do, because in order Kingdom Rush needed to still have this visual level design, and it was the idea, the premise of the consumer is that it has to look the same, but in 3D. Yet, for example, so Kingdom Rush, for those who don't know, is the genre is called a tower defense. So the idea is that you have a road and you have hordes coming on that road, and as a player, you have to put towers to kind of slaughter everybody before the end, basically. But basically, you have to survive an attack from someone. And the one thing that's really core to the video game is that once you put a tower, it's going to be there forever, and it's going to shoot for you. And that one thing is actually horrible from a board game design, because it means that it's a decision you've made now, and now you have no more decision to be made about this. And when you play alone on a device and you have plenty of things, then it's okay, because you're by yourself, you can have some downtime. But if you play 4 people around the table and that's all the square are quickly filled up with something that you don't have to reinvent or rethink, it's actually really boring. it's not fun. And so they broke something when this game designer, they told, well, at the end of each turn, all the star goes back to your hands. At first, it was very scary. It was like, whoa, that sounds like a big promise removed. But the more we played and the more we realized, wow, that one thing that is not like the video game is really what makes that board game, wow, like up there and really engaging over time. So ultimately, I still think that it has to at least visually appeal to the story of and the emotion that you've seen, but you should not compromise and to be true to the video game by fear of just making just a flat out bad board game. And ultimately, there is a lot of people, for example, who play Jetpack Joyride who don't know the video game, and it says, I don't need to know the video game. What I played was very fun, actually. Those who know the video game was like, wow, that was exactly like the video game. It's great. But those people who don't know it said, I had a good time, and I want to buy this game now. How much is it again? So I would say that this is the bridge that you need to find, and certainly I would encourage you to kind of broadcast in a way that's safe for you, other brains on this, because it's, I think, one of the hardest thing to do, because it comes with such a frame, right? It's like it's not just an open design; it has a very strong frame that I think we find success by opening it to many game designer, and hopefully I answer a question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Zijn er nog vragen?
Maybe it's an odd question, but another type of hybrid games can be exclaimed like playing board games on Steam. What's your opinion on that? Since I'm actually not a big fan of that, because it takes away the immersion.
Mm-hmm. I'm not a big fan of that myself. As a matter of fact, technically we can do it because we come from the video game industry, but there is a reason why I'm not in the video game industry anymore, and it's because the barrier to entry in video game is so low that my 6 years old right now is learning how to program a video game. Actually, this is really it is the democratization of it is really hard. So it means that if you, as a board game publisher, decide to make a digital version of your game, you need to realize if you thought the board game industry is competitive, wait to see the video game industry, which is fully digitalized, has no barrier to entry. Anybody. There's literally over 500 video games released every week that Apple and Google have to pick, and only 7 of them or 8 of them can be featured to try to get some traffic. So I'm answering from an entrepreneurial hat. I would say be careful translating your board game into a video game if you go through a third-party developers, unless you can try to get a licensing deal and have them cover all the costs for it. That's probably the best thing to do. I would otherwise, if you have no experience with publishing video games, I would say don't spend your money there. It's certainly, it might work out. It's very likely it won't, or it won't make enough money to pay back for that development. I don't know if your question was related to publishing or just playing.
No, in general, but
Yeah.
because like I said, I actually am not a fan of it, but I can actually understand why people would like have tabletop simulator. Then they can actually get to know a random game, and sometimes they buy it, but sometimes they don't.
So a counterpoint to this is that we have seen, especially on Kickstarter, absolutely growing submarket of the solo player, which is counterintuitive, right? You think board games are meant to be played together, but actually there's plenty of not so young adults, actually. A lot of this community is rather in their late 30s, 40s. And have basically a hobby, yeah, and have massive amount of collection and nobody else to play with them. And so there was this, it was a very controversial Kickstarter, but it's still a very good point. A game called Unbroken, solo game, 14,000 backers. I mean, it just shows that there is certainly a large amount of people who enjoy board game and just can't find the network to play with people. So for the right game that was already marketed as a solo game, having and being already quite successful and quite visible, having a video game adaptation may be a pretty good idea, because it's mostly tapping into that solo player audience, removing all this physical tear down and setup and role reading, and basically adding this accessibility and elements of surprise and barrier to entry and stuff like that. So it may be the right segments therefore to access, rather than hoping that everybody who bought the board game will buy the app. Like you, I don't think so.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Any
well,
more questions?
Well, that was already a lot. Thank you so much, guys, for coming over and chatting with me. Have a good day. A good evening.
Thank you, Vincent, for coming, and thank you all for enjoying this masterclass. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.